So one thing that I do is I don't quite say things exactly the same way. And I think that's okay. I do see people who share, maybe a screenshot of the exact posts they posted previously that did really well, and they'll share it even repeatedly. That is one way to go about it. But I think what everyone has to keep in mind is that it takes, 20, 30 times for somebody to really associate your brand with a thing. Like putting it in your feed, most people won't see it. They'll scroll right by it. They won't remember it. And so I do this because I want to be known for a thing. I want to be known as the person who talks about how to do this type of operations and automations.
You're listening to Content Logistics,
a podcast for B2B marketers where we explore the foundational
and sometimes frustrating elements of content.
We're talking to the experts, learning all their tips and tricks, and sharing them with you.
We don't gatekeep here. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to another episode of Content Logistics. We're your hosts. I'm Baylee and this is Dallion. And today we're going to talk about how to automate content creation from any conversation.
We have a really exciting guest joining us today. Her name is Anna Burgess Yang. She's a freelance content marketer and journalist who specializes in helping solopreneurs automate their content and make the most of it. We're really excited for all the tips and tricks that she shares with us today. We can't wait for you to listen.
This is a topic that we are very passionate about, automating processes, especially content creation, because we don't want any of our conversations to go to waste. So Anna has a really unique and special way that she takes advantage of basically every conversation that she has, and she's able to repurpose it into different types of content. So it's super time consuming and just a great way for anyone to get started on creating content in a way that can be almost completely automated.
Thank you for having me. I am also quite passionate about this topic, especially as basically a solo marketer and solo operator. And so I think there are just so many ways to really make use of your content.
We take a look at your LinkedIn and you have so many different posts about this. Also, you're posting so often. That's really impressive. And I'm sure we'll dive into how you're able to do that with this process that we're just going to talk about here. But just to get started, why should people consider automating their content creation process? And why should they not let any of their content go to waste?
So I think, it is a two-pronged question as you brought it up. So the first is that whether you're operating alone or whether you're on a content team, we are all strapped for time. There is truly only so much that we can do. And the second part of that question is, why should we not go to waste? I really feel like there's such an emphasis on quality these days, right? You need to produce something that's of really high quality in order to get anyone's attention. Otherwise, people will just scroll by, or they'll land on your page, they won't read it, they'll bounce. So you're putting all of this work into something amazing, right? And then the bottleneck happens with what comes next. Like, how can you make good use of that content again? There are a lot of people out there talking about content repurposing and saying, take your blog post and splice it into 4 things. And that's great. Those are great tactics. But what I focus on when I talk about it is specifically how I use automation to help that process. So an example is somebody has to mentally think, okay, I'm going to take this post and turn it into 4 pieces. When do those get scheduled, right? There's additional steps that have to happen, and there's mental bandwidth involved in knowing when those steps should occur. So I focus on how can you automate those pieces of the process so that there's less thinking involved at each step, because you've already done the work. You've done the hard work in creating something great, and now you're just making it continue to work for you for days, weeks, months, years into the future.
I love that so much.
Yeah, that's such a valuable way to take a look at it, because And there are so many different ways to go about it too. Like you said, you could start with a blog post or you could just start with a conversation. I think for the purpose of today's podcast, we're mostly going to focus on starting with a conversation, whether that's a Zoom call or probably mostly Zoom calls or any type of digital conversation that you're having with someone. But what types of businesses and individuals benefit most from automating their content creation?
So, with the example that you have of things like conversations and calls, I think it's a lot of businesses that might be interviewing internal or external subject matter experts because they're having conversations that are just happening. It's either part of creating a different piece of content or it's getting context for the content. So there's all of these conversations that may not make it into any type of written format, or you're just doing research, something like that. Or another example would be, companies that are having sales conversations with people. And so you're talking about your product over and over in different ways every single time, right? And so there are ways to pull those insights out and even do it in a systematic way and say, okay, I said this thing about this industry to this prospect. Now what's a way to take that and turn it into a piece of content in the future?
Yeah. How did you keep up with those things? And I know we'll get into some of the details of how you automate as we continue to talk. But I think for me personally, I know all the ways that we can create content out of those things. And I think people understand that, but they don't know how to keep track of it, how to plan to use it, and then how to plan to distribute it. So how do you keep up with all the things?
So, the way that I'm taking conversations and turning it into content is through a transcript. So I am moving that transcript onto my Google Drive. The tools I use happen to be Otter, but this would really work with any transcript tool. So, and then I'm using Zapier, which is an automation tool in the background. So once a transcript hits a specific folder on my Google Drive, then in the background, Zapier is running through that and saying, look only at my side of the conversation. I want to repurpose my own content. So look at just this via ChatGPT specifically. So I'm telling ChatGPT, look at me, look at what I'm saying. Now, what are the insights you can pull out of that? And then take those insights and drop them into another location so I can review them. That could be another Google Doc. A lot of people just kind of dump their content ideas there. I specifically output the content to Trello, which is what I use for project management. Could go anywhere. But basically, transcript, run it through ChatGPT, output it elsewhere. I'm just automating all of those steps in the background via Zapier. Certainly that could be a process also of, uploading a transcript to ChatGPT or things like that. But so I have specific prompts that say, this is what I want you to do. This is kind of the format that I'm looking for. Usually I'm turning it into a social post. So all of that's kind of done for me so that I can take the output and just edit it. It's never exactly what I want, right? But it's at least a major starting point, way easier than manually reviewing a transcript and trying to pull out those insights myself.
Yeah, that saves so much time. And I love that you could use this for any conversation that you have with anyone. Like this conversation we're having right now. I'm sure we could pull so many different social posts or anything else from this. But in addition, what other kind of conversations would you include in this process that you have?
I even include coffee chats with people, which I do a lot of, and a lot of people do, whether they're solo operators or whether they're, just doing it as part of, business development or things like that. In some way, shape, or form in those conversations, I'm talking about who I am, what I do, the type of work that I do in the background. And so why not turn that into a social post? It's saying a lot of the same things I'm already talking about, but each time it's a little bit different, right? And, you mentioned how much I post on LinkedIn. It's because for somebody, that's the first time they've seen me, right? Or,
Right.
they've seen me once every 3 weeks that I show up in their feed. So it's kind of another reminder of, oh, this is what I do. And these are the things I talk about. These are the things I talk about over and over in every conversation I have.
This is so good. There's a few things that you've said that I want to go back to. One of them being Zapier and how you set that up, and maybe I know that I'm not the most avid Zapier user, but what was your experience like? Okay, I'm gonna start automating my whole content process, because I think you have thought this another level deeper than most people are thinking.
Yeah. And I've been a Zapier user for a very long time, even when I was
Okay.
working for employers. So, but I think there's one is just understanding how Zapier works, that basically if something happens, something else happens. And that for most people, that's pretty straightforward. Where I think a lot of people get stuck is envisioning what else can I do? Like that is
Yes.
harder, right? And I think when I talked about this on this particular process on LinkedIn, people are like, I wouldn't have thought of that. And that's where I think a lot of people get stuck is just maybe, the creativity, because it seems like a step-by-step process, right? Like you're starting here and you're ending here, but really there is a lot of creativity involved. Like, okay, I have this. And maybe I was doing it manually. Maybe I was manually uploading a transcript into ChatGPT. And then, I asked it for results and then I needed to copy that text out and put it somewhere else to save it. So then how could I do that automatically? How could I do that so I'm cutting a few steps out of the process and saving myself some time and not forgetting anything? Not missing a conversation that might have otherwise been really great to grab insights from.
Yeah, I think that's such a great idea and really just opens the possibilities of so many other things that you could do on Zapier. And I mean, you put a screenshot of the post or of your Zap in the one of the posts that you made. It was so simple. It's just if you upload it to the Google Drive, do this, and it could have just been just do social posts, but you take it an extra step and have it do a couple other things as well. Do you mind just walking through maybe what some of those other outputs could potentially be?
Yeah. So I also sometimes have it run through, depends on the conversation, run through and create a video script for me. So a conversation like this, I could easily grab a clip from the recording itself. But maybe on top of that, I want just me talking about it in a different way. And so one thing is just create a video script and I'll include what I want in the script, how long it should be, and a couple of examples of scripts that I've created previously. So there's a good kind of follow this format. And then I also have it generate some key takeaways. And a lot of transcript tools will do this after the conversation. I'll say, here's some takeaways for you, but it's both sides of the conversation. And for the purpose of what I'm doing, I only want it to look at my side of the conversation. Or if you're interviewing a subject matter expert, you only want that person's for key takeaways, not both sides. So I have it do a couple of key takeaways. Those might end up in my newsletter. Maybe I'll expand on them and they do turn into social posts. Or maybe I take my key takeaways and turn it into a long form piece of content. But I basically ask, like, what are 3 key takeaways for this? So it's just another thing that I could potentially use again in the future.
That's so good. I think that the other thing that you said that I think most B2B companies maybe struggle with, at least from my experience, they do, is the idea of sharing the same message a little bit different over and over again. I think people feel like they need to be continuously reinventing the wheel. And I think that you wind up spinning your wheels and wasting time and trying to figure out like the right thing. And so obviously you're doing this for yourself on LinkedIn, but how do you coach and advise people about like getting their core message out to the world continuously, like, and often?
So one thing that I do is I don't quite say things exactly the same way. And I think that's okay. I do see people who share maybe a screenshot of the exact posts they posted previously that did really well, and they'll share it even repeatedly. That is one way to go about it. But I think what everyone has to keep in mind is that it takes, 20, 30 times for somebody to really associate your brand with a thing. Like putting it in your feed, most people won't see it. They'll scroll right by it. They won't remember it. And so I do this because I want to be known for a thing. I want to be known as the person who talks about how to do this type of operations and automation stuff. And the other thing too with automation is because I'm outputting my format to Trello, or it could work with any project management tool, I can put a date with it. So I say, output these social posts and kick it 90 days into the future. Kick it 6 months into the future. And then it's part of my overall content plan that when I get to that point in time, now here's this piece of content waiting for me. So it's building out this calendar simultaneously. And then I don't feel like I'm talking about the exact same thing for 3 weeks or, for even a month or two. It's going to be a while before those exact things come up again, even though I am talking about similar things over and over.
Yeah, I love that idea of just putting variety in the timing of when you post things. I think this is such a great way to learn what kind of posts resonate with your audience and what kind of content is just putting it out in different types of ways, because sometimes we don't maybe know the exact question that people are asking. We're just trying to share cool things that we're doing and testing out, and just finding a different way to say that can be really valuable. So what are some of the common challenges you see that people face when they're just creating content manually? If they don't have maybe a process like this set up, what are some of the challenges they face? And then after that, how can they just get started doing something more like what you're talking about?
So I think the biggest challenge is that this type of take a thing that you created, like a conversation, and turning it into something else, that falls to the bottom of everybody's priority list. They did the hard thing. They had the conversation, they recorded it, they pushed it out there the first time, and taking that extra step to get additional mileage, it just falls behind creating the next cool big thing, right? And so I absolutely think that is the hardest challenge for people, is just knowing that this is part of the process. This is part of getting the most ROI out of the conversation, out of the recording, out of even the coffee chats that you're having. So that's really, I think, the overarching problem. To get started, I think if you're not comfortable with an automation tool like Zapier, the first step is to at least do it manually. At least get in the process of downloading your transcript, uploading it to an AI tool like ChatGPT or something else that you're using, and creating the prompts to say, this is what type of output I need from this conversation. And then what does that process look like to then edit and publish from there? That's still a ton of time saved over manually pouring through a transcript or losing the value by ignoring it altogether. So at least baking that into your process gets you so much additional content that you can use. And then you can look at, okay, now how can I automate this and make this a more regular streamlined part of my content creation and get it on the calendar at certain points. I mean, my content calendar is booked out for months because everything is just feed, it's a constant feed. I'm never thinking about what comes next. You mentioned in the beginning, how many times I post on LinkedIn 3 times a day. And it's because I have so much and I'm not afraid to and it's so much variety. It's so many different things. So it's not 3 text posts per day. It's 3 different types of content. And I'm comfortable doing that. So far, nobody's told me to be quiet or anything. And then I'm constantly getting in front of people. So brand, personal, whatever, there is a way to build up over time a volume of content without it necessarily being a ton of additional work.
Yeah. I Well, I want to implement this today. I want to have a backlog of content on LinkedIn like you have. That sounds so nice, just to be able to not have to stress about posting, but just having good content from conversations that you've had with people. Previously, you mentioned just in some of your prompts that you'll include examples of other stuff you've done. Do you have any other tips on maybe creating those prompts for AI?
Yeah, so I'll usually include some background about like who I am and what I do. So I say, I am this person. I'll even like yank it directly off of my LinkedIn profile and say, this is who I am. This is who I'm talking to. And this is why I want them to pay attention to this type of content. And then I'll list out like 3 examples, like here's some posts that I did in the past. And then I also include an instruction to not include hashtags and not include emojis because ChatGPT in particular goes a little overboard. So I'd rather just add them myself rather than try to back it out. That's just easier for me. And I also include in the prompt, only return the text of the post, for example, and nothing else. That makes my copying and if you're doing copying and pasting, that makes it easier. That makes it easier when it goes into Trello for me because otherwise ChatGPT says, certainly, here are the responses. And then that's just one more thing I have to edit out. So my instructions specifically say, only return this, nothing else.
Those little steps can save so much time though. Just not having to delete the little extra stuff that it outputs. Any other tips on your tools that you use? So I know you use Zapier, Google Workspace, as well as Trello. Are there, for people who maybe don't use those tools, do you know any alternatives or why would you recommend those tools?
Yeah, so I'm using Otter as my transcript tool, but like I said, really any will work. Otter, I like that I can save a transcript directly to Dropbox. I wish it would save directly to Google Drive. It doesn't right now, but by saving it to Dropbox, I have another automation in the background that automatically moves the transcript from Dropbox over to Google Drive. So I'm not even doing that. And then I can pick and choose because not every conversation is something that I need because I record everything. And sometimes it's just a client call or something like that. It's not something that I would use for social content. So once the conversation's over, the transcript is safely in Otter. I just say export to Dropbox, scoots it over into Google Drive. It goes from there. I would say, no, I think, like I mentioned, it really works with kind of any tool, like any project management tool. And so I don't necessarily know that like my tools are the right thing to use. It's just really what works for you and like what works for your budget and what works for kind of your process and the way you look at things. Because Trello and the way it's organized, that works great for me. Other teams work with Asana. One of my clients uses Asana. So really anything like that I think can work. And I use ChatGPT because it has Zapier integration. I'm able to easily call it in my process. There are tons of other AI tools out there as well. So I've mostly selected those that work well with how I work.
Yeah, and I think that really nails it for anyone who's just trying to get started. Just use the tools that you're already using to take this process for whatever works for you.
And I have one more tip that I also use. So because I can't let anything go to waste, I mentioned that I will take a long form, interview and have it spit out a shorter script for a video. Once that video is done, I drop it into Dropbox. Otter picks it up, creates a transcript from that video, and now I have additional text to share again. So I'm truly taking it another step further. I'm like, okay, I had to do all this work to create a 1-minute video that I'm putting on social media. Why let that by itself go to waste? That can become yet another piece of content, another tiny transcript that becomes another social post in the future.
You've
I'm
got
so
this nailed
inspired.
down.
Yeah, I'm inspired. I have a lot of work to do for my content automation process. This is amazing.
Yeah, I think, I'm not like any other person in that I'm strapped for time, and but at the same time I know why it's so important for companies, for individuals to put themselves out there, especially on a platform like LinkedIn. And then I have a
Yeah.
whole other process to take my LinkedIn content and move it over into threads. So that's also going on in the background, and I'm repurposing my own stuff again for other platforms. And it's a lot. I mean, it's a lot to publish on LinkedIn 3 times a day, but the brain power is not as intensive because I'm taking
Yeah.
it from something that I've really already created before, just tweaking it, saying it a little bit differently, and then republishing it.
What's been the result for you? How has this changed your life, your digital life personally, and then, just what's been the difference from before you were doing this to now?
So I started publishing very consistently on LinkedIn sometime in 2021. I can't remember exactly when. It started with just one post a week, became 2 posts a week. I started with repurposing my own comments from LinkedIn. So I would take a comment that I left on somebody else's post, and that became my own post. And that's how I originally built up this huge repository of stuff. And then in October of 2022, I lost my job at a content marketing agency. And I had been freelancing on the side and thought, okay, I'm going to go all in as a freelancer. And meanwhile, I'd had more than a year of showing up very consistently on LinkedIn. So the minute I said, I'm looking for clients, I had an influx of inquiries and work. And at this point, all of my client work is inbound. I do very little outreach. So everybody's coming to me. And I think that would be true for even people working at companies or anything like that. There's brand recognition, there's understanding of who you are, what you do, and what you offer. So in terms of the impact on my life, I don't like cold pitching. I don't think I'm very good at it, and I don't have to do it. So by showing up, that is literally how I get business and what's made my business successful.
It's amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that is the goal of any business, any solopreneur, like not to have to sell yourself, just sharing valuable content on LinkedIn, showing up 3 times a day.
It is a form of selling myself, right? Because clients that come in, they know who I am and they know the type of work that I do. And usually they've checked out my portfolio and looked at my website, and they've done that all before they even reach out. And to some extent, it's saving them time because they're having to do less research. It's pretty clear who I am and why you would pick me maybe over somebody else because I'm out there. And so, it is this form of selling. I try not to be I'm not an aggressive marketer. I'm kind of just, hey, this is who I am, and what you see is what you get type of person. But that makes it more friendly, and I think that makes me more personable. And I think when I show up online and when somebody meets me in person, there's a match between the two. But that only happens by really talking about, hey, these are conversations that I've had. These are things that I've said, and now they're showing up as a social post.
People like that. It's easy to relate to. It's so human. And I think that brands could take a note from what you just said, because I think that sometimes we're trying to please the masses with our content, and you really just need to be you, and you'll attract the audience that you ultimately need, and are the audience that resonates with you, with your brand, with your messaging. And I think that, sometimes we overcomplicate that process. And so I love that you said that.
There are some brands that I'm not even their target audience necessarily, but I'm like, oh yeah, I know the sales development rep there because I see them all the time, and I know what their product does, even though I would never license their product. I'm not the right person for that, but I still know who they are and what they do because these people show up and talk about it all the time.
Yeah. I
Do-
love the way you, oh, go for it, Dallion.
I want you to go. I want you to go.
I was just going to say, I just love how accessible this process is for anyone. Like Dallion and I, we sit on client calls several times a week. There's so much valuable content we can pull from those calls for our clients, for their accounts, as well as for our personal accounts. And it would be so easy to throw them in a process like this. Salespeople, like you mentioned before, like it's a very accessible way, even for people who aren't maybe on calls constantly. If you just want to throw on a recording device and just share your thoughts on XYZ for a little bit, like that is so much easier than maybe drafting out content for an hour. Anyway, yeah, I just love how accessible it is.
Yeah, I think, I talk to a lot of people that say, I don't know what to post on LinkedIn. But these same people are having conversations. They're having coffee chats. They're having conversations internally or with people. I'm like, those ideas are there. You're having the ideas. You know your product, you know your industry, you know yourself. And so take those ideas and now turn them into something else. And I think that is kind of one of the easiest ways to get started with publishing online.
I also like that something that's coming to mind for me is that we have companies that come to us that say that they want to get started with content. And like you were saying, they don't know how. And I think sometimes we feel like we have to start from zero. And I think maybe that's the wrong way to look at it because, as you're saying, like we could just say, hey, give me the last 10 sales calls that you have recorded and like let's start with that. Like let's start small. And what you said earlier was like you started with one post a week, two posts a week. Like get started and use what you already have because it's all there. You just have to mine it out and get all that gold that's already there.
Yeah, that's exactly the case. I did some ghostwriting for a while for a founder for LinkedIn. I don't do that as much anymore, but for a while I was. And he and I would just hop on a call like once a quarter and be like, tell me about your customers or tell them about their pain points or just riff for 30 minutes. And then out of that, I was able to pull a whole bunch of insights like, okay, this is an idea for a future social post. I still had to expand on them. But like you said, you're not starting from ground zero. You're starting from this conversation and understanding what that audience needs and what that person is all about. And then you can go from there. And not everyone's a writer, but that doesn't mean they don't have ideas. And I say that all the time. And so there are ways to kind of get that information out without sitting and staring at that blank screen, wondering what you're going to post next on LinkedIn.
Yep, that can be the hardest part is just just getting started, but more than likely most people already have somewhere to jump off. So we're coming up on time, but I have I guess two more questions. One is just if you have anything else you want to add.
Yeah,
Um,
I do.
oh, okay, great.
So another tip I have for publishing online, especially if you feel kind of that paralysis with like, what are people going to think? And that can still happen. Even if you're using this process and you've grabbed your own insights and you're ready to publish, there's still a lot of fear that comes with that and with, what kind of comments and reactions and what if nobody reacts and they just didn't like it and things like that. So I schedule my content out very far, like usually a couple of weeks. I have completely forgotten what I was going to say that day. So it's just a surprise. Like whenever I log into LinkedIn that morning, I see the reactions, I'm like, oh, that's what I had to say. And I really think that is very helpful for getting over that fear because you're not sitting there typing it and hitting publish, you're scheduling it. And I use Buffer. LinkedIn has native scheduling. I think the native scheduling is pretty terrible, but it's free. But I would really recommend building up this repository, getting a whole bunch of stuff scheduled. I just do it all in one sitting. And that really helps getting over that hump of like, I can't post on LinkedIn. It's too scary.
That's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah. To surprise yourself.
It is a surprise.
Love it.
That's such a good idea. So it can be scary to hit that schedule button.
I think Baylee and I are we're gonna use a lot of these tips for our personal LinkedIn profile, but I also have
Yeah.
I have a ton of client ideas from this conversation.
So then our last question, this one's kind of more fun. What is your biggest content marketing ick? So what's something you see that just makes you cringe that you wish didn't happen?
I think people that are always posting stuff like, here's how I had a $10,000 month or a $30,000 month, and it's just a brag with nothing tactical. And what works for one business just doesn't translate to another. I understand doing social proof. I understand things like that. But people who post just like, here's a chart of the million views I got from this one post or something, like, I just don't care. Like, that's just me. And I do want to celebrate milestones for people. I think those are important. I think other people just take it overboard, and I am always skeptical. Sometimes I even wonder if it's real. So that is a personal ick of mine, is I'm just not a fan of sharing these insane metrics with no context or nothing that serves the reader. It feels like it's just a brag.
Yep, it's very clickbaity, just trying to get people to to click the post or see what it's all about, and it usually isn't. Well, it can depend. Maybe it's really valuable content, but I think to your point, often it is not. So then, Anna, where can people go to learn more about you?
Yeah, so the best place is start.annabyyang.com. That's kind of my landing page. And you can work with me. I have a ton of free resources on Gumroad. And so there's a link over there from that page. Like, I have a resource that's specifically, what tools do you use to kind of get started? And it talks about different types of tools, a couple of examples. So start.annabyyang.com kind of gets you to where you can go from there, depending on what you're interested in.
Great. Thank you so much for being on the show today. We'll make sure to link your website in the show notes so people can find you. And we look forward to chatting again here soon.
Thank you so much
Anna.
for having me. Great conversation.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Content Logistics.
If you enjoyed listening, you can follow Content Logistics wherever you get your favorite podcast.
Or access all episodes at marketersindemand.com. Bye.